I got some cherry from a friend who lives up in northern Missouri. It came from an old barn. It's about almost 2 inches thick. Some of it was pretty rough. I decided to make a cutting board out of it. So the first thing I decided to do was cut it to a rough width on the table saw. Here I am cutting the cherry board. It's about 6.5 inches. Then I'm jointing the face of this side here. My jointer is only 6 inches wide, so about a 1/2 inch of the board really wasn't getting touched by the planer knives. So I had to keep flipping the board over, rotating it from one side to the other. That way it would kind of even itself out. Each time I flipped it around, the line would disappear and go to the other side. Here you can kind of see it's getting smoother. It was pretty rough. There was a lot of dirt, and you can still see the saw marks from the sawmill, I guess. The board is probably really old. Here you can see the line left from the jointer. So I brought it to the bench and decided to do some hand planing. Kind of remove that jointer mark that it made and smooth out the knife marks a little bit. So I'm using a number 4 Stanley bench plane for this, for the smoothing out of the board. These are real nice, smooth surface, much smoother than you can get with sandpaper. Here I just keep adjusting the blade depth, and shavings are probably 1/1000th of an inch, somewhere around there. So now that I have one side of the board flattened, I'm bringing it over to the surface planer to get the other side parallel and flat. I think I ran it through maybe 5 or 6 times, just taking off a 32nd of an inch maybe at a time. I also made sure there was no nails in the board. I did that before I ran it through the planer. Here you can see it's starting to get a lot smoother. The texture of the wood's smoother. Got rid of a lot of the saw marks, the dirt. Here's just an example of the two boards. This is how it originally came out. Pretty rough, kind of punky on the side. Saw marks, a lot of dirt. And then here's the board, the other half of that board. Really nice and smooth and pretty nice actually. Has a really deep, rich cherry color. And here I'm just planing down one of the edges because these are going to be glued up together and I want them to be really tight without any gaps between them. So I'm planing again with the Stanley plane and checking it with the ruler, looking for gaps in the middle. Here I have a little slight gap right in the center. Yeah, right about there. Just a slight gap. So I'm going to plane down each end a little bit. Kind of take off a little there. And a little on the front end of the board. And it looks pretty good now. No light coming between the ruler and the board. Oh, here I am, just taking a little break, organizing some of the lumber I got from our local lumber yard. I picked up all this 5/4 cherry for about $20. It's just a sawmill, and they sell lumber, but they make moldings, and they take their scrap lumber and kind of bundle them up and sell them for a pretty good price. So I'll definitely turn those into some small projects. So here I am, just kind of putting those away off the table saws. Now I'm cutting the cherry board into strips. I'm going to use a maple and cherry sandwiched together in alternating patterns for the cutting board. I'm going to cut the board into 4 strips. Each piece gets a little bit thinner, so I have to move the fence closer to the blade. I've been using the micro jig grippers, which I like a lot. Even though I use a saw stop, it's nice to have the safety of the gripper. I like how it keeps the board tight up against the fence, and also the offcut doesn't get left behind next to the blade. It pushes the offcut away also. This last piece I have to cut is only 3/4 of an inch thick, so I had to use the micro jig gripper with the extended foot that rides on the table saw to help support the workpiece. You can see the cutoff shoot through the blade here, land on the floor. It's pretty thin, probably less than 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch. Could use that for a shaker box sometime. So here are the pieces: 3/4 inches, 1 1/4, 1 3/4 inches, and 2 1/4 inches. This is the cherry. Okay, now I have the maple board that's going to be alternating with the cherry, and I'm going to rough cut it down to about 17 inches long to trim off any ends that are checked or split. This board also is thicker than the cherry, so I have to surface plane it down until it matches the thickness of the cherry. Here I'm using the Capex with the laser to cross-cut the maple board. Okay, well, this is the end of part 1, and I'll be back shortly with part 2 on the next section of the cutting board process.